Our universe is incredible, surrounded by mystery and beauty, and many of us have questions about our past, present, and future. October Hallam is an intuitive medium with over 20 years of experience. She has assisted people with discovering their path by understanding their past and connected the living to their loved ones who have made the transition. She is currently offering readings through Skype, Zoom, FaceTime, phone, and in person. You can reach her at theancientgift222@gmail.com. Welcome back to Forbidden Knowledge News. I'm your host, Chris Matthew. Today, my guests are Randall, Carlson, and Matthew Lacroix. Before I bring them on, a couple of announcements. Forbidden Knowledge News is asking for your help. This summer, we're going to be filming a documentary, and we could use help with the funding. If you appreciate the content Forbidden Knowledge News has brought you over the past 6 years, and you would like to help by leaving a donation, those links are in the description. We have a Buy Me a Coffee or PayPal option. You can go to supportfkn.com or use the PayPal link. Forbidden Knowledge News is always available on Rokfin, Minds, Odysee, Rumble, and all podcast platforms. Definitely check out Rokfin. This is where you get our premium content, and best of all the content and premium content from every creator on Rokfin. Our website is forbiddenknowledge.news. It's the home of the Forbidden Knowledge Network. We feature other podcasts from our badass podcast community. Be sure to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Today, I want to welcome back to the show Randall, Carlson, and Matthew Lacroix. Randall Carlson is a master builder and architectural designer, teacher, geometrician, geomythologist, geological explorer, and independent scholar. He has nearly 5 decades of study, research, and exploration into the interface between ancient mysteries and modern science. He has been an active Freemason for 43 years and is a past master of one of the oldest, largest Masonic lodges in Georgia. His work incorporates ancient mythology, astronomy, earth science, paleontology, symbolism, sacred geometry, and architecture, geomancy, and other arcane and scientific traditions. Matthew Lacroix is a passionate writer and researcher who grew up exploring the outdoors of northern New England. After college, he began studying ancient civilizations, philosophy, quantum mechanics, and history. His focus became uncovering and connecting the esoteric teachings from the secret societies and ancient cultures that disappeared long ago. He is author of 2 books and a writer and researcher at Gaia. He is currently co-writing his 3rd major book with Billy Carson entitled The Epic of Humanity. Randall and Matthew, welcome. How are you gentlemen doing?
Well, I can't speak for Matt, but it would appear that he's doing quite well. So I am as well. So I'm fired up for a good conversation. And yeah, so whatever you guys want to talk about, I'm looking forward to seeing what Matt has to present tonight.
I'm going to be presenting some data because Randall and I are data-driven people, and I'm very, very excited to be here, Chris. Thank you so much for hosting this. And I just want to say that, Randall, it's truly an honor to speak to you to the highest degree. You're one of the greatest inspirations that led me on this path. So to be able to have a discussion with you is truly an honor tonight.
Well, thanks, Matt. I do appreciate that. And
yes.
What can I say? I'm humbled. That's all I can say.
What I can say is this discussion is going to be epic. Like Matthew said, he's going to be presenting his data and theories on some of the things that could have caused the disappearance of advanced megalithic civilizations and the cyclical cataclysms that may have been connected with the massive resets of our past. Now, this information may differ a bit from Randall's theories, and we're definitely going to get his thoughts and insights into that information. And I'm going to be asking some questions along the way that I have as well. I'm extremely excited for this. And like I said earlier, I'm ready to have my brain melted out of my ears. So, without further ado, I'm going to turn this part of the discussion over to Matthew. Matthew, where do you want to start with this tonight?
Well, maybe we can talk about some of the new things going on, because I think Randall's got a lot of exciting things happening, and I have some pretty exciting things happening too.
That sounds good.
Coming along here. I guess I'll start since you pointed to me, and then I would love to hear what Randall's doing. So I'm going to be going down to Peru and Bolivia. The trip was already booked at the end of July to with Billy Carlson to meet up with Brian Forster and do a megalithic tour of the major sites in Peru, Machu Picchu, Sacsayhuaman, Ollantaytambo, Cusco, of course. And then we're going to get into Bolivia and visit Tiwanaku and Pumapunku in the Lake Titicaca area. And we're going to do a number of different shows and get a whole bunch of footage and really just point out the very distinctive differences between the truly megalithic sophisticated blocks on the lowermost levels of these structures versus the more earlier, as we think of the classical Inca, that build on top with more mortar and more primitive sophistication. So I'm really excited about that. And I also just want to briefly mention Billy Carlson and I are going to be releasing a book soon. It's called The Epic of Humanity. That's going to go through this alternate timeline, how far back our story goes, presenting as many ancient writings from around the world as we can to piece together our lost story. And then one more thing to just mention is that the book after that is going to be the greatest project that I've ever taken on. And it's going to deal directly with what we're going to be discussing tonight. And that book, which is going to really delve into physics and it's going to really take me to some areas that are going to challenge me, is going to be called The Dead Star in the Fall of Civilizations. Mm-hmm. And we'll get into that as we go along. But it's great to be here, guys. I'm really excited.
Awesome. Thank you, Matt. Randall, what you got coming up? Anything interesting you'd like to discuss?
Yeah. Okay. Well, sure. I'm headed out to Washington State on Friday. And I'm going to be participating in the filming of one episode of a major documentary series, which I don't think they want me to talk about it yet for some reason. But anyways, that's going to be cool. And shortly in the near future, we will be able to talk about it. And hopefully it'll be seen by a few people. It's going to, we're getting into some, on this particular episode, we're going to be exploring the great floodlands of the Pacific Northwest. And then I'm going to be meeting with some of the leading citizens of the town of Soap Lake, Washington. We have been running tours out of there, even tours right through the pandemic, taking people out in the field and teaching them the principles of paleohydrology and recognition of catastrophically created landscapes. And so essentially what I'm doing is putting together, I guess you could call it a curriculum, where I take people out, and to the best of my knowledge, and of course I'm still learning, there's lots more gaps to be filled, but what I'm doing is essentially trying to teach people a language. And this is the language that is written in the cipher or alphabet of the rocks, of the landscapes around us. And the working premise of it is that for 12 to 13,000 years, there has been this story that has been engraved into the surface of the earth. And for the last 10,000, 11,000 years, we have been too limited in the scale of our thinking and our observation to be able to perceive that there is this story literally engraved into the surface of our planet. And so the story is written in the alphabet of catastrophism, in effect. So what I'm trying to do now is to inspire people to learn about being able to read this story, to read the script. So that's a big part of what I'm up to. I will be doing, I got a tour coming up in a few weeks that will be headed out to some archaeological and geological sites in Arizona. And we have got, we've kind of gotten within our network some interesting people. Bertram Savadawa, who is a Hopi storyteller, is going to be our guide one day. We've got Cleve, and I can't quite pronounce his last name, so I'll just say his name is Cleve. He's Zuni, and he's going to be taking us to some places, ancient Puebloan sites. So it's going to be a mix of archaeology and geology. But then that week of exploration out into the high desert country is going to be bookmarked by 2 weekends where we're bringing together, I think, a really interesting mix of people. I'll, of course, be there, and then Graham Hancock will be there. This will be the weekend of Easter in Sedona, Arizona, if you're familiar with Sedona. Beautiful place. I've had some people tell me, hey, this is one of the most beautiful places I've ever seen, and I've been all over the world. But yeah, so it's in beautiful Sedona, Arizona. And if you guys know who George Howard is, George Howard was, he's the creator of the Cosmic Tusk website, which is probably the best site online for diving in specifically to Younger Dryas information, impact related information. He was also the co-author of that seminal 2007 paper that first proposed that the mass extinction of the megafaunal remains, the lower Younger Dryas boundary, was associated with impact proxies. And so there have been multiple teams. I think at this point, it's overwhelmingly confirmed that there was some kind of an impact, but it's such a thing that, what can I say? It's so varied in its fingerprints that it left behind that I'm even thinking that it's more than just, it's not a single impact of a single homogeneous species of impactor. That, in fact, I'm thinking it was more along the lines of an impact epoch that was one of the triggers. Now, there have been more, because what we're also beginning to understand now is that the whole solar system operates as a system. And so a lot of these things that are happening, say, for example, the flux of material that's in the inner solar system, is ultimately, most of it is, if it's not being slingshot back out into space, it's going to get swept up by the planets, but most likely the sun. And what the solar observation satellites are now revealing to us is that the infall of cosmic matter into the sun seems to be intimately related to the heliospheric response, that there may be a connection between the infall of cosmic matter and coronal mass ejection, solar storms, and so on, which to me becomes a very interesting, adds a whole new wrinkle to thinking about this. And then ultimately, we have to go to the galactic level, because if we assume that the Oort cloud and the Kuiper disk have some basis in reality, and I think that there's enough evidence to suggest that some model of massive reservoir of comets exists in a cloud, and if you have perturbations caused by nearby events, which could be anything from perhaps a galactic core explosion a la Paul La Violette, or a nova star, maybe just a random, I don't know, if even an encounter with a black hole. There could be any number of possibilities that would cause the disruption of the very fragile stability of this sphere of material that's out there, sending this stuff cascading down towards the sun with a whole array of secondary consequences, which include not only Earth, but the moon, Mars, probably, the sun. And so we have to start thinking in these larger term scale and how all of these pieces fit together. So that's what I've been kind of doing, thinking along those lines. In Sedona, basically what we're going to be doing is we're going to be looking at, I'm using, since it's Easter, I thought an appropriate theme might be the Holy Grail. Because, the Holy Grail, remember, if the Christianized version, I don't know if you guys have studied into the Grail stories. If not, you should. But
Absolutely.
The Grail stories are pretty much all a product of this one epoch, which was the late 1200s, early 1300s. And every story is varied in very peculiar, idiosyncratic ways. But you have to go through systematically through the different stories and realize that it's like the old proverb, the Indian proverb about the five blind men and the elephant. You remember that? Where they're trying to figure out what kind of a creature it is, and one of them is feeling the leg and the big pill. Oh, it's a pillar. Somebody else has got the tail. Somebody else has got the ear. Somebody else has got the trunk. And they're all describing these different things, but they're really just describing the same thing. Well, it's kind of like that. That's a good metaphor for the way the Grail stories are set up. They describe different points of view of what's ultimately the same thing. And my contention, in a nutshell, is that the Grail, which is usually in most people's mind represented by the chalice or the cup, right? There's very potent reasons for that, but it's also symbolized by a whole array of other things. A bleeding lance is one of the typical things. Oftentimes a sword. The Grail has been represented as a sword. It's also been represented as a stone, simply a stone. And that's connection with the stone, then, of course, ultimately connects it with the philosopher's stone of alchemy. Mm-hmm. And they both, in fact, confer the same thing, which is that, the Grail, remember what was the ultimate objective of getting the Grail? It was to restore the king to health. But it wasn't just the king, it was also the kingdom, because something had caused Lug, which is the ancient term for the kingdom of Britain, had fallen, it had become, something had laid waste to the kingdom. And the Grail was the antidote. It was what would heal not only the debilitated king, but also the land itself. So with that perception, what I maintain is having spent years now immersed in this literature and thinking about this and following these clues, is that really what we're looking at is the Grail actually symbolizes an ancient technology that has been lost to history, but a technology. And what's interesting is when you begin to put these ideas to the test, what you understand is that one of the key principles associated with the Holy Grail is that it's bimodal in its functioning, in that the same force that can destroy the world also recreates the world, regenerates the world in the aftermath. And once you begin to understand what the Grail is, then you begin to see that, yes, in the natural world, I almost hesitate to use the word supernatural because of the connotations, but we are also really talking about nature on a super level here. But so the theme of it is connected with spring and Easter and so on. Remember in Chrétien de Troyes' telling of the Grail story, Joseph of Arimathea, who was one of Jesus, is described, I think, in the book of Matthew as one of Jesus's secret disciples, which I've always thought is a very interesting, who was also allied with Nicodemus, who was one of the disciples that came to Jesus by night, right? Remember leading up to the Passover? I don't think they were named. Jesus sends out two disciples to go to Jerusalem, right? And when they get there, they're supposed to go to the town square and look for a man carrying a pitcher of water. And when they see that guy carrying the pitcher of water, they go and they're supposed to say a very specific word by word recital to the guy carrying the pitcher of water. Like, have the chambers for the master been prepared? I forget the exact words. He will then take you to a house. And at that house is where he's going to have this meeting. Right. So he's got a meeting with his 12 disciples there. And this is the famous Da Vinci painting, The Last Supper and all that. That's in this house. Well, who owned the house? Well, it might have been Joseph of Arimathea. The householder, the owner of the house is not named. But clearly, when you think about it, okay, who was the guy with the pitcher of water? And why did they have a go-between between the two disciples and the owner of the house who is hosting this dinner? Well, The connection, of course, is that during this dinner, Jesus drinks from the cup, and he passes the cup around, and they all drink from this cup. He's then crucified, and when Joseph of Arimathea, who according to some genealogies may have been Jesus's uncle, he goes and convinces Pilate to let him take the body. But as he takes it down from the cross, what does he do? He collects, because if you recall, 6 hours after the crucifixion, Joseph of Arimathea comes to Pilate and asks if he could remove the body. And Pontius Pilate, well, he didn't believe he could already be dead after only 6 hours, because crucifixion was designed to prolong the agony of death for as long as possible, even days. So Pilate didn't believe necessarily that Jesus was dead. He sends a centurion out there who prods him in the side with his lance, right? Does not get a response, goes back and reports to Pontius Pilate that Jesus was dead. Pontius Pilate says, go ahead, get the body. They go and they take the body down, and Joseph of Arimathea collects blood coming from the wound in his side in this cup. And then, according to legend, from this is in the Bible, and then you get the legends where he departs with his 12 disciples and ultimately ends up in England, where he meets up with the chieftain Arvigas, who gives him 12 hides of land, which is 1,440 acres, which he turns into the sacred precinct. And at the center of that, he builds a small wattle or woven branches chapel that's 39.6 feet in diameter. And there he established, according to legend, the first ever Christian church. And there the Grail was hidden for centuries. And then somewhere along the line, it became lost. And then in the Middle Ages, you had this release, declassification, the way I look at it, is of all these stories of the Grail, right? So, of course, with the crucifixion, right? Think of the death of the king. This is a story that's told over and over, whether it's Orpheus or Tammuz or Odin or Osiris. Variants of this story are told universally. In the Christianized version at the dawn of the Piscean Age, it was Jesus Christ, who was the fisher of men, which of course is the perfect astrological connection with the dawning of the age of Pisces, right? So what I'm all getting to in this long rant here is that the theme of these 2 weekends is going to be the Holy Grail, and how that leads to the ideas of destruction and decline, but also within there are the seeds of renewal and regeneration and resurrection. And I am specifically applying it to, because it's have such a broad application. I've kind of narrowed it to the idea of education, and showing that education is now like a rotting corpse. It has become standardized education, establishment education, and it's time to resurrect true education.
Well said.
Using, and in which context we would go back not only decades and generations, but millennia, to draw upon the best of traditional systems and then fuse those with the best of what we now know about neuroscience and regeneration of brain cells, even, and going from there and establishing, as important as it is to, like we're connecting right now in the digital world, right? Well, this is extremely valuable, because we're going to be able to, and we are, linking up the entire world. And by doing this, we're going to be able to establish networks that transcend the old type of nationalism that is now leading to international conflict. Here's the thing. If we're online and there's a network of Russians and Americans and Chinese and from all parts of the world who are all interested in very similar ideas and philosophy, who believe in peace and freedom and truth. See, this was going to be the worst thing that could happen to the establishment, is that all of us, millions and millions of people that in one level or another have this kind of outlook on life, this philosophy of life, we're going to get together. It's going to happen. And the outcome of that can be powerful. But this is the digital connections and the digital networks are not a replacement for the actual face-to-face of real people getting together and sharing space together and sharing meals together. Again, a reference back to the idea of the Last Supper. And so I've dominated the conversation long enough. We'll circle back to this after you've had a chance to say some things, Matt. But I would like to get into a little bit more of the specifics about what we're going to be doing in these 2 weekends and how we're going to tie the vision of the Grail into this as a possibility. Because basically what is happening, guys, is that there's a network of people coming together, bringing the resources that want to draw upon these traditional, really powerful, and we'll talk about that, methodologies and if you look, and I'll leave it at this, that when you look at the past history, and I bet you figured this already out, Matt, is what you see over and over again, whether it's South America, North America, whether it's Egypt, whether it's Sumeria, whether it's even China, megalithic England, the cathedrals of France, it doesn't matter. You've got this common inspiration, and the idea is the uniting of heaven and earth.
Exactly.
That's what it is. And there are, with that basic core idea, now it follows that there are actually implementable strategies. So that's when we circle back what I'd like to talk about. But I'm going to shut up for a minute and let you share some of what you've got going on, Matt.
Yes. Let's get into your stuff, Matt, because I know that both of you agree that it was most likely a lot. These cataclysms, many have probably occurred throughout the ages, but most of them have been most likely caused by causes that are cosmic in nature. But the causes that you research might be a little different. And I want to get into, Matt, your theories on what you think may have been connected with these cyclical resets.
Thank you. And thank you, Randall, for letting me present some of this. And please challenge me on any of the data that I'm presenting, and we can go into this discussion because you're an extremely well-versed and intelligent person. And I admittedly have holes in areas of, I'm not a physicist. So there's areas that you can please chime in and maybe correct me if there's a better way to say something, or if there's something that I said that's inaccurate. Because in the end of the day, like Randall said, we're coming to a time when it's the age of information and truth is returning. Like the ancients used to hold most dear to them was this idea of knowledge, shown around the world through the symbol of the serpent and the metamorphosis of the great feathered serpent into the dragon. And we are returning to those great, the knowledge of those secret societies that eventually became largely disappeared or corrupted and remained in some small areas, like the Freemasons and some others, where we're trying to gain that back again. Because it seems we're certainly in this age where, as Randall said, I love how he put it, it's like a rotting corpse is like our education system of this very dumbed down, very antiquated perspective of when we try to understand everything in our reality, everything in the cosmos, and what the part that we play in all of this. And really, when you leave high school and college, you think you know everything, and really you're just been largely indoctrinated into just certain key concepts to give you an idea of it, but you don't get any of the fill. You don't get any of the interesting aspects of what makes all this exciting. And I know that Randall's probably had countless people tell him the same thing, is that when you look at megalithic, ancient, lost civilizations and catastrophes throughout time, and the sophistication that those cultures around the world, whether it's the Americas, Egypt, the Turkey, the Middle East, through Iran and right down into India and all these incredible temples around the world, or get to China with the Yangshan quarry that has the largest single megalithic block in the world. All around the world, we find that those civilizations, in many ways, perhaps not on a technological level, but on an understanding of sacred geometry and the energy ley lines of the earth and the cosmic connection with everything, they were on a level that we are simply not at. And that's why these mysteries remain with how these blocks were moved, how they were built, why they were built, why civilizations will go sometimes over 1,000 miles just to obtain a specific type of material. You look at the Karnak temple in Egypt, and with the travertine block that's present there, that multi-ton block, which is the nearest quarry where travertine can be found, is over 1,000 miles away in Turkey. So we have to start asking ourselves questions on whether these civilizations knew tremendous amounts of knowledge that we simply don't know anymore, that's been lost over these periods of cyclical catastrophes. That seems like every time one of those occurs, we lose more and more knowledge, not gaining more and more knowledge. And that's why understanding the ancient past is so critically important, because that's where many of these answers remain. And so we simply have to, like Randall said, we have to restructure our education system and come together as a unified people to all have this commonality goal of reaching these higher states of consciousness by coming together and learning the ancient knowledge of the past and applying the knowledge that we have obtained through technology today. And that's how we can create that paradigm, reaching, the golden age and reaching this next cycle of our story. And so there's a lot there. And Chris, I don't know if you want me to, Randolph, I don't know if you want to say anything on that before we go into some of the reasons behind this and some of the evidence behind why these civilizations seem to have been destroyed. But just, let me know.
Sure. No, I could interject thoughts as we go along here, but I don't want to break your train of thought. You're on a good roll there. And I should actually be making a few notes here, but I'll just say this, that, we're looking at events here and phenomena that is mysterious, that is awesome, that is stuff that's really almost like outside the traditional, the recent paradigms of thinking about Earth history. And so and obviously the point here is that the Earth history and the history of civilization on the Earth are completely coupled together. You can't, and this has been something that's sort of been a bone of contention to historians and archaeologists and so on, that, whether you're talking about an environmental or a climatic determinism, and they've not wanted to go there. But I think it's clear at this point that the evidence does support the conclusion that civilizations have succumbed repeatedly to a variety of events. And I'm sort of the mind that, it's just like, the elder priest told Solon in Plato's dialogues that, there have been many causes.
Exactly.
And, and what I was saying early when my first comments was that I think that in some cases, these causes are connected, because we can now explain mega scale flooding as a result of impacts into the ocean, into an ice sheet. We can also explain the ignition of tremendous, maybe continent-wide fires that, so you've now got the two ends of the spectrum where you have the cataclysmos, in the Greek terminology, the destruction of the world by water, and you've got the ekparousis, which is the destruction of the world by fire. But we can understand that in the case of a major bolide impact, you could have both. But that may not be the only thing. I'm not, I haven't ruled out that the sun does, plays a very important role, and that we may only be beginning to understand how truly variable the sun is. And then we have to be thinking in terms of the whole heliosphere and its interaction with the Earth's geomagnetic field and what that implies, because if the intensity of the heliosphere is interrupted, that means more cosmic ray bombardment. And then we got to get into, well, what are the sources of cosmic rays? And so, we're looking at a whole broad spectrum of phenomena that I think is all interrelated and interconnected. And maybe in the grossest level, the end product may be that there's an enhanced flux of encounters between Earth and swarms of bolides. I think that's part of it. But we're also looking at some phenomena that may be just purely energetic. We might be talking about, who knows this? I haven't looked into this, so this would be just purely science fiction speculation on my part, but, ripples in the space-time continuum or some such thing. But I'm not going to go that metaphysical yet, because right now I'm still thinking about rocks falling out of the sky, okay?
Yeah.
Okay. So with that comment, I'm going to take a breath and let's dive into your research there, Matt.
Okay. And I love how you're so open to the idea that these events seem to be multiple reasons why, and they may be all related, and some may be heavily emphasized on cosmic impacts from objects, and then others could be related to something else. And that's what the something else is where I want to bring in some of my data. And so, Chris, I guess if you're okay with me just taking it away.
Yeah, go for it.
I'm going to start by, as Randall said very, very well, and he discusses, and I love this, the idea that these catastrophes, this order of magnitude, the idea that we look around the world at these almost like small events that are happening, right? A volcano goes off in Italy, and then everyone's freaking out because lava gets near a town. And then you have a devastating earthquake somewhere, right? On like a 7 or an 8. And you get a lot of destruction because humans are all over the planet. But really what we're talking about here, as Randall has coined, the order of magnitude for these events that we've studied through everything from charred levels of soil around the world at certain points that can be tracked for their age, to the ice core samples taken from Greenland, looking at what the snapshot of what the Earth's climate was over the last 20,000 years, to everything from cosmic impacts that are still historically around the world, and things like vitrification, which we're going to get into too on some of these megalithic sites, where what we're looking at is these ancient civilizations that go back well over 12, 13,000 years. I'm on the mindset when I study this that they go back over 50,000 years. When we look at, like, for instance, we know, as Randall said, when Solon met with the temple priests of Sais in Egypt, and they discussed that there have been multiple catastrophes on the earth, we find out a date for when Atlantis was destroyed, as in this myth that is contended as not being a real, and it's some kind of an allegory or metaphor. We find out, well, no, actually Atlantis was destroyed 9,000 years before Plato existed, which falls right into the Younger Dryas impact time period, which is extremely interesting because then you start to tie in that with the ancient Sumerian and Akkadian and Babylonian stories of a great deluge. You get into the stories from the ancient Viracotians of Peru when they talk about these catastrophes that occurred there. And you get into the stories, ancient flood stories from China and Japan, and nearly every one of these areas on the world where we can identify this incredibly sophisticated megalithic structures on these lower levels, where what we find on top is so much more primitive. We start to have to ask the question of, number one, how many civilizations have come, not hunter-gatherer nomadic groups,
Right.
but when the rise of civilization occurred, with the sophistication found through things like animal husbandry and agriculture and metallurgy and the written word and all these things that have come along. Once that happened, and it's contended on when that happened, but I do think that it did happen in Sumer. But when that happened, how many of those civilizations rose up and then were destroyed nearly, and then another culture came and found those ruins? Like in a place like Machu Picchu, you can go into the indigenous stories on how the actual, what we think of as the Inca, emerged likely out of the Amazon rainforest after some of these catastrophes had occurred, and they found Machu Picchu covered in jungle and completely in ruins. And then they tried to mimic and build on top of those structures. And that's why you see such distinctive Masonic and stone masonry work in those places. And I think what's interesting is that Machu Picchu, which I'll be visiting in July, presents one of the best and compelling pieces of data that shows that there's been at least three different civilizations, because what we find in the areas of the royal palace in the center of Machu Picchu, the Torreon, we find the area of incredible megalithic architecture, precision, like we find all around Peru on the lowermost levels. And then right above it, as Brian Forrester has discussed often, there's this slightly smaller megalithic building we find on top that seems in a very small gap, almost like it only occurred in a small amount of time. And then you have the masonry we find from the classical Inca, which is more like a mortar type of aspect with small stones and cobbles, showing that there have been 3 civilizations there. And when you look at stories like in the Maya and the Aztec, they describe how we're in this age of how there have been civilizations that have come and gone, and we're in like the 4th or 5th time period of these catastrophes of civilizations rising up and falling. And instead of thinking that it's only been like one before us, we're looking at multiple ones. Now, how far of a gap did those exist before they were destroyed repeatedly? And how far back does that whole story go? And once we can determine that, we can figure out when these cyclical catastrophes occur on a regular basis. And I'm of the opinion that the purpose behind Göbekli Tepe mapping, or the main purpose behind having a cosmic library that maps out the zodiacal great year of the Earth, is that they knew when those events would occur. And I think that they were planning for them. And the evidence behind that is because they buried Göbekli Tepe before these catastrophes came through, in order, in my opinion, in order to protect that library. Because I think they knew, they were forewarned and had an understanding that those events occurred. And I think every time those have happened, the civilizations have had less and less knowledge that those things were going to occur. And so that's where I really want to get into. Yeah, go ahead, Randall.
Well, what you're saying is that's without actually being data driven, it's purely speculative, but that's precisely what I had speculated. Because, having one of the things that I've studied is nuclear deterrent technologies and nuclear strategies. Not so much lately, but really a lot, heavily in the 80s particularly. And then I realized, as I started looking at cosmic impact phenomena, that there was a lot that we had learned about detonations in the atmosphere and detonations underground from all the nuclear testing that applied directly to our understanding of what occurs when an object, say, for example, something like the 1908 Tunguska object comes in and explodes 5 miles up in the atmosphere, and what it does in terms of pressure waves, thermal pulse, all of that kind of stuff. And it's very similar to a nuclear weapon detonation without the radiation that you would find, the radiation signature that you would find with a nuclear
like isotopes. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So in any case, when we went from going to a mutual assured destruction scenario to a survivability scenario, that's when they began to harden all of the command and control centers and missile silos. And of course, what did they do with the missile silos to protect them from the surface blast? They bury them, basically.
Underground.
And so within that framework of thinking, I had concluded basically almost precisely the same idea, that it was buried and this could be to protect it not only from the blast effects, but from radiation as well. So if there was radiation involved, and one of the things I'm studying right now, trying to learn more about, is what we now know about what happens atmospherically when you have a major impact event. We do know from the Tunguska event that it caused some pretty major fluctuations in the ozone, and a multiple impact event may temporarily deplete the ozone in the atmosphere to the point where cosmic ray bombardment increases by an order of magnitude or more.
That's interesting. I've never heard of that. Okay.
Yeah. So that's, this is stuff I've been considering. And at this point, catastrophism is still in its infancy. We've been straitjacketed into this gradualistic model, this uniformity model, for a century and a half. It's been the dominant model of Earth change, and it's been very valuable, very powerful, very insightful, but it's only half the equation.
Yeah, exactly.
The other half is that, there's this other mode, and it involves short-lived periods of extremely accelerated change. And so we have to look where within those very short episodes, you may have factor of 10 or 100 or 1,000 times the rate of change that you find during normal times. So,
exactly.
So I had come to that same idea that maybe Göbekli Tepe was buried specifically to protect it from catastrophic events. The first thing, of course, that came to my mind was a blast a la Tunguska kind of event, but also then, radiation as well. And there may be more dimensions to it. I don't know. That's as far as I've taken my thinking at this point, though.
Yeah.
So I would tend to agree with you, Matt. I think that's a high contender for a possible explanation for why it's buried.
Okay.
Well, we know, astrology is extremely important to the ancients. It was encoded in almost every ancient text, including the Bible, and they apparently knew the stars way better than we do now. But, what exactly did they know? Did they know about a specific cataclysm? Did they know about a specific cycle? And I know, Matt, you have some theories about what it could possibly have been, more specifically than we've discussed before, right?
Yeah, and this is some cutting edge stuff. And I don't know if Randall knows some of this. And so not because he doesn't know a lot, but this is something that's very obscure. And it's something that I've spent a couple years studying and really digging into. And I would love to get his opinions on it. And I want to present some of this and we can look at it. Like Randall said, it seems like the common theme here, and don't pull that up quite yet, Chris. It seems like the common theme here is that these civilizations likely knew about these cycles of catastrophe that come through. And they knew that the most important thing that they could do is protect knowledge, right? So you look at the story of Egypt and you look at other civilizations, were those created out of things like the Atlantean civilization because they knew that there was a catastrophe that was going to destroy their civilization? And so they went out and they created these libraries and mystery schools, and these initiates traveled around the world, and then they created civilizations in order to protect that knowledge. We certainly see that with symbols like the pine cone and the handbag-like symbol that we see in Göbekli Tepe Pillar 43. We see in all across ancient Sumer, Akkadian, and Babylon of these symbols this knowledge being passed to a king and a priest. We see it with the Olmec in La Venta, Mexico, with the exact same symbols of passing this knowledge and creating these civilizations in a certain image. And so what I'm going to be presenting and discussing is that, first and foremost, I absolutely think that there have been many, many cosmic impacts throughout Earth's history. Okay. I just want to throw that out there. Absolutely. I'm not trying to say that this is the only thing that's happened at all. I'm simply saying that I believe that this is the primary factor on why it seems like I believe that there have been cyclical catastrophes somewhere between every 13,000 and every 20,000 years is where my data has shown me that these have happened. And we get that data from some very, very brave astronomers. I don't know if Randall's ever heard of Robert Harrington and Thomas Van Flandern, but both of those individuals were studying outer objects impacting our solar system, and how those impacts might have some kind of a timetable on when they occur. And I want to point out that both of those men mysteriously died in the middle of their work. And they were both highly revered astronomers. Robert Harrington was the head of the U.S. Navy astronomy program looking at all of this. And Thomas Van Flandern was a very famous physicist and astronomer that was actually working with Robert Harrington on some of the things that I'm about to present right now. And so what we're going to do is we're going to go into some data, some hard data right now. And I can't wait for to get Randall's opinion on it. So go ahead, Chris. And I want you to pull up the image that I shared. And I want to give a little background on what this is. So in the late 1970s and the early 1980s, NASA was really, they were concerned and curious about why it seemed like the entire ecliptic of our solar system seemed to be tilted on its axis, especially the outer planets of Uranus and Neptune, and things like Pluto being thrown out in the middle of nowhere. There seemed to be some very strange aspect to this where something was interacting with the entire inner solar system. And that's the other thing that I want to bring up is we have to understand that there's an inner solar system and an outer solar system, and that's largely separated by the Kuiper belt. And as Randall pointed out, beyond that, we have the Oort cloud. Now, in that aspect of us studying our inner solar system, there are still incredibly open-ended questions and considerations when we look at the outer solar system. We know very little about it. Number one, no person has ever been beyond the moon, and Mars seems like the furthest we can really get. And of course, we've sent probes, and that's really where a lot of this data is going to be coming from. So when NASA was looking at, well, what is causing these perturbations and this axial tilt to the entire solar system and all these objects, they were very curious. And so what they did is they sent two probes out in 1983, known as Pioneer 10 and 11. and they sent them out in completely different directions. Pioneer 11 didn't find anything, so it became something that's not really important. But Pioneer 10 was sent out into the outer solar system. And what Pioneer 10 found, I firmly believe, is one of the most critical aspects that has actually turned into quite a huge conspiracy in my mind on what is actually out in the outer solar system, because of the implications that it has for these cycles of these destruction of civilizations, and how it's also going to impact our current civilization now. And so I'm going to go ahead and discuss this for a little while. And then I'm really excited to hear some of Randall's thoughts on this, because I don't think he's ever seen this image. And if he has, that's great. So what this is if you were to go search online right now and you were to say, oh, I'm actually really curious about what Pioneer 10 found, you will find that the internet is literally scrubbed of information. It's all gone. Okay. What's weird about that is in the 1990s, I think it was 1993, it was somewhere around 1993, 1995, NASA actually came out with a press announcement. I don't know if anyone remembers this, but they said they discovered a supermassive planet that existed beyond the Kuiper Belt that was 4 to 5 times the Earth's size. That was actually the quote that they gave, where they said they found this object out there that was 4 to 5 times the size of Earth, way beyond the Kuiper Belt. And of course, I am, just to be very clear, I am not a Zecharia Sitchin supporter in his work, and I'm not talking about anything like a Nibiru aspect of all this. This comes from something that these objects do, I don't believe, interact with the inner solar system in a physical way. I think it's an energetic way. And that's what I want to be very clear about, because you would have to essentially pass through the Kuiper Belt and all these things. Well, at the same time, Caltech in the 90s started studying the Kuiper Belt with objects like comets and asteroids that seem to have a really strange ecliptical orbit, just like our solar system did. These really weird orbital tracks that don't follow the models of what we think would occur with having a single star in our solar system. Now, what I want to add to that, to understand that people know, is that in our understanding of the Milky Way galaxy and the universe, 80% of all star systems are binary, and a lot of them are trinary or more. I mean, in the Pleiadian star cluster, there are more than 800 stars. So what we're talking about is the common aspect is that when you have a star cluster in a solar system form, most of the time there's at least 2 stars that form in a system. Okay. This is the most understood aspect. Now we look at our studying of our solar system, and then we're told in school that we have a single star known as our sun, and that there's really nothing to worry about in the outer solar system, right? Everything's focused on the inner solar system. But what I've come and looked at is that that's really not the case at all. And this is exactly what Robert Harrington and Thomas Van Flandern were studying. This is what I believe, that something nefarious occurred with them, because as soon as Robert Harrington and Thomas Van Flandern died, their work was considered mathematical incalculations. That's what the term was, that they came along and it was all their work was simply mathematical miscalculations, I should say. And so everyone's like, oh, okay. So that planet that they announced that was 4 to 5 times the Earth beyond the Kuiper Belt, I guess that's not really there. And I guess all these other things aren't really there either. But what I've come to discover is that what Pioneer 10 found is what may be one of the greatest secrets ever kept from humanity right now. And I say that in a really honest way. And I'm not trying to embellish that statement at all, because I believe that it may be one of the greatest factors in all of these catastrophes. So let me explain this just a little bit. So Pioneer 10 goes out and it finds all this stuff. And then you go online, you search for it, and it's all scrubbed. There's no information about what Pioneer 10 found. It's almost like it didn't find anything. Okay. So I started doing some digging, and I found out that there's only one place that exists on the internet where the data from Pioneer 10 was ever kept. Okay. And it's in the 1987 Science and Invention Encyclopedia. And that's what you're looking at with this image on the screen right now. Okay. And I wanted this image up there so people don't just listen to me and think that I'm making all this up. So to me, well, what happened, right? Well, page 2488, there's a description talking about space, in general. It talks about the outer solar system, it talks about Pioneer just a little bit in terms of how they sent a probe out and those things like that. But it has this image, this depiction, right? That has the most phenomenal things that it depicts, and then it doesn't talk about it at all. It doesn't even mention one thing about this, and yet the image remains. Okay, so you have to come to the conclusion that they were told to not talk about it, but somehow the image was left there. Okay, and before in 1987, before computers were really a big thing, that was the source of information, right? So there's these volumes have existed. People had them in their basement from 1987, and someone uploaded this image. Now, it took me months and months and months and months to find a high definition image of this. This is a PDF that I was able to obtain after very, very extensive searching. And this is like over 6 months of searching to find this, because it's almost like people were photocopying or scanning it in, because there was a few people out there that did like see this and were like, whoa, wait a minute, right? What is this? And I finally found a PDF of it. And the first thing I did was upload it to my website. And that's what you're looking at right now is my website, The Stage of Time, because I want this to be known by the world and to be preserved. I don't want this to be lost, because it's all we have left. It's all we have left of what Pioneer 10 found. Now, I want to just briefly tell what it found, and then we can get into the effects of it, because I want to have Randall jump in, but then I also want to discuss my theories behind how this impacts the entire galactic plane of our solar system, okay? So it goes out beyond the Kuiper Belt, right? And it has a way to identify signatures of objects, because a lot of these things are dark, right? This planet that they found, which is what NASA had announced in the 1990s, they're very hard to see. In fact, a lot of times you can only see them if they pass in front of another object and create a shadow. Whereas in this case, Pioneer 10 was actually designed to detect these objects using things like infrared and other aspects to detect heat, latent heat, and other kinds of signatures from these objects. So what does it find? At this time in 1983, it finds a planet 4.7 billion miles away that is 4 to 5 times the size of Earth, okay? In the outer solar system beyond the Kuiper Belt. And then what does it find? The greatest secret, I think, of all time. A dead star, 50 billion miles out. Now, when I started looking at this, and I started looking at Robert Harrington's and Thomas Van Flanders' calculations of this object, they thought that this planet and this potentially this star, and they didn't really talk about the star, but they talked about the planet, may have an interaction with our solar system somewhere around every 20,000 years. That was the prediction that they made before they disappeared mysteriously. Now, when I've studied these objects, the dead star and this planet, I've come to the conclusion that I believe when I look at the data of these catastrophes and the location of where this dead star was, that it may have a perihelion pass, meaning the closest pass to our sun, of somewhere between, like Robert Harrington and Flanders said, of somewhere between 13 and 20,000 years. And that may differ slightly. But if that's the case, then at every time that this goes into perihelion with our sun, the entire solar system heats up, because the sun will have to maintain its equilibrium and will essentially send out massive pulses of energy in order for to maintain its heliopause. In order to maintain its equilibrium, it has to send out massive coronal mass ejections. And as this dead star goes through its dance, and as it goes into aphelion, meaning further away from the sun, I believe that you see that calming down, but massive cooling of our Earth. Okay. And I believe that this object may, and I'll go into much more detail in a minute, but I want to get Randall to jump in. I believe that this interaction with our lost binary star and this planet is the reason why not only do we get ice ages and rapid melting and warming, but cyclical catastrophes on the Earth from coronal mass ejections and pole shifts, which have, and we can go into all kinds of discussions on what that does. But before I go any further, I just would love to get Randall's thoughts, so I don't just keep talking on and on about this.
Well, I have read Flanders. It's been 20 years at least. I have one of his recent books comet in the title. Sitting on my shelf right in the other room. So I'm a little bit familiar with some of these ideas. I mean, I've also looked at the idea of cyclical catastrophes. 13,000 year period definitely seems to coincide with your conclusions. Because, you know, we look back, if we go back to 13,000 year cycles, we're back at the, you know, basically the previous dawning of the age of Aquarius, right? Which is, in the astronomical sense, is just going to be the position of the vernal equinox with respect to the fixed backdrop of the constellations, right? But I may even be able to pull it up here in a minute, where I've plotted some of the catastrophes that I think have been well documented by looking at things like Heinrich events, Dansgaard-Eschger events, which seem to be major upheavals, climatic upheavals that are associated with like a Heinrich event is a massive disgorging of icebergs into the oceans. And something is triggering that. And there seems to be sort of a 13,000 or 26,000 year periodicity to that. Now, if we go back 26,000 years ago, we're almost within like 1 millennium of the start of the final phase of the so-called Wisconsin Ice Age, that was preceded, you know, there was like 3 phases or so in the late Wisconsin Ice Age, which was after the Eemian, which was 120 to 130,000 years ago, which was considered to be an analog to the modern warm period. You had several intervals of glacial expansion and glacial contraction. The question is, how much glacial expansion, how much glacial contraction? That is not known with perfect precision, but it does appear that prior to 26,000 years ago, down to perhaps around 40 to 42,000 years ago, there was a major period of deglaciation, which we know from pollen studies and evidence of vegetation and forests growing in Canada. Obviously, if you've got forests growing, there's no ice sheet there, right? So it sort of fits. And I might actually be able to pull up here. While you're talking, I'll pull up something. So on your next breather, I'll show a compilation that I did.
You want me to jump back in, Chris, and just keep going for a minute?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, go ahead. I'll have some questions at the end, so go for it.
Okay. And I'll just expand on what I was doing to conclude before Randall jumps in and we change to a different aspect of looking at this. But you'll notice that what Pioneer 10 found in terms of specifics looking at this object was that they didn't identify it as a brown or a red dwarf, this our binary companion. They identified it as a dead star. Now, what's really, really interesting about the term dead star is that it most likely means that the star went into a supernova. Okay. Mm-hmm. So if you look at Earth history, and this is where we get back into potentially as far back as 60 million years ago. I mean, we look at the idea, the whole concept of how the dinosaur period was destroyed with this massive impact crater in the Yucatan Peninsula, which, you know, they have evidence of that in the Gulf of Mexico. But I'm actually starting to wonder and put this together that if you have a binary companion that's going through a nuclear supernova explosion, before that event occurred, that star would get extremely hot. Okay. And as every time it came through its perihelion, it would interact with not only our sun, but our entire solar system and affect it in a very, very massive way. And it's interesting looking at how the Earth didn't seem to have the seasonal aspects that it has now, and how perhaps something like the great year in this axial precession of the equinox with our planet didn't seem to exist. So what caused it? Why all of a sudden did this cosmic impact hit the Earth and then change the entire tilt of the planet and cause it to have a precession of the equinox? Or did something else happen? Or is it a combination of everything? That's the thing. Like Randall says, could these objects, this binary companion and this planet, could they disrupt the entire Kuiper belt and then send objects flying in and maybe it's a combination of everything? But I'm proposing the idea that when that supernova went off with this binary star to make it a dead star, it likely was one of the reasons why we had mass extinctions on the earth, because we know millions and millions of years ago, looking at fossil records, that there have been extinction level events on the earth that were so significant that even it's considered microbial life was wiped out. So what kind of an event could cause, besides the idea of just a cosmic impact, what about some kind of like a supernova? What if that binary companion supernovaed close enough to impact our entire inner solar system? So anyway, the whole idea is that a major event occurred in the past. When that event occurred, we don't really know. It seems like it was likely millions of years ago, just because it's now a dead star and no one can see it, because not only is it 50 billion miles out, but it's a dead star, which means it's dark. Now you start getting into some ancient cultures around the world who have mentioned something like a dark star or a black star, right? And there's even cultural references in, like, David Bowie's last album is called like Dark Star, right? Before he mysteriously disappeared. And so it's just interesting how we're looking at this interaction where when I've studied the binary's rotation, its entire rotation in conjunction with our sun, with our solar system, and how the Earth's precession of the equinox is a 26,000 year cycle with this tilt of our entire solar system, I'm beginning to wonder if the interaction with this binary star is actually in the same thing, some kind of a 26,000 year interaction. And this interaction with our sun is what's creating this gigantic precession of the equinox with the whole solar system, is impacted through a dance with this binary. Now, there's a documentary that's been made that I highly recommend people go look up. It's called The Great Year. Okay. I don't know if you guys have ever seen that. It's not very well known. I think it came out in the 90s. And it has a very, very significant narrator. Someone that everyone knows. I can't remember his name off my head, but there was a very well done documentary, and they actually talked about that. They showed the interaction of this binary companion. I was like, why aren't people known about this documentary? And they actually proposed that the Great Year regarding the precession of the equinox is based on the dance of this binary. So I'm not the first person to talk about this. I'm just the one going into details to try to figure out how it relates to these cycles. So anyway, the point I'm trying to make is, now here you have this dead star, super dense object, right? Still has the density that it had, but you can't see it. So you just have this energetic interaction. And I believe that its approach to our sun creates this massive warming, sends out coronal mass ejections, probably cosmic impacts as well. And what we're talking about is a magnitude of order of events that are so significant that it's like something out of a Hollywood movie. Imagine you have this binary star, this dead star, come within perihelion of our sun, and it causes the sun to shoot out massive coronal mass ejections. Not what we're talking about right now, with these little ones that disrupt satellites and internet around the world. How about something so significant that the poles either flip or shift so significantly around the Earth that you have every tectonic plate and every volcano go off? Tsunamis around the world that are miles high, traveling all around the world at supersonic speeds, volcanoes going off everywhere, subduction of plates like Atlantis, sending land masses down into the ocean, like that sunken ruins we find off of Cuba, which is like phenomenally interesting if you look into that, where you start to say, well, we're talking about an event that, according to ice cores, when we look at the Younger Dryas time period, seems to have occurred over 1,000-year period. Okay, so this isn't something that happens right away and then it's over. It's like multiple events in 1,000-year period that have different events. Maybe there's cosmic impacts. Maybe there's coronal mass ejections. Maybe there's massive fires across the Earth, tsunamis, volcanoes. How about everything all in that time period? It would explain why these sophisticated civilizations that know about energy ley lines around the Earth and mapping out stars, mimicking like the three pyramids of the Giza Plateau, mimicking the stars of Orion and the energy as above, so below, explains why they would have just disappeared at the height of their sophistication. I want to just add one more thing, Randall, before you jump in. If you go down to the unfinished obelisk in Aswan, Egypt, right? The largest obelisk ever created. We're told that it wasn't erected because it cracked, it broke. But I propose that a massive earthquake actually cracked it. And just like we find in China with the Yangshan quarry, in the massive megalithic block there that was just started to be cut and then it just was abandoned. And we see in the Baalbek Lebanon quarry as well, the biggest blocks they were ever going to take out and start constructing. All these sites around the world, it seems like these cultures reached the height of their sophistication, not the other way around, and then they mysteriously disappeared. And so I believe that these events are what has caused that disappearance of these lost civilizations.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what are your thoughts, Randall?
Interesting ideas, and I think we certainly concur on the idea of a cyclicity and civilization succumbing to these events. Certainly, you've done some thinking about this, and you've come up with some very interesting ideas. And yeah, I mean, I think that at this point it's fair game. I mean, we need to be looking at a lot of different perspectives on this thing. So I'm willing to entertain these ideas. I mean, basically what it comes down to is the idea of a remnant star, and whether that could be a binary with our sun. And if I get this correctly now, Matt, you're thinking that we're looking at presuming a dead core of a star that went supernova and close enough to our solar system that it was able to disrupt. Now you're saying, but this dark star is a companion?
Yes.
And it was a companion when it went nova.
Yes, but I'm thinking that it had to have been on aphelion when it went supernova, or would have destroyed the entire solar system.
That would make sense. Yeah. I mean, if it was, so it must have been, but see, even that being far removed, remote from the inner solar system could still have enormous consequences.
Of course.
So I'm in agreement that if there was a nearby supernova, that yes, it could definitely have consequences. Now I had not necessarily thought. In fact, one of the things that I had thought would be the thing that could trigger the cascades of comets from the outer solar system to the inner solar system would have been, in fact, that would have been my most likely candidate, would be a nearby supernova.
Isn't that interesting, right?
Yeah. However, not thinking necessarily that it's in it's in a relationship with the Earth, that it's a binary. I haven't really considered that too much. I mean, other than what I do recall from having read Tom Van Flandern years ago, but again, it's been over 20 years, I think, since I read his book. I might just, if we take a break, go see if I can grab it off the shelf, just because I know I've got a lot of highlighted stuff in there. Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think that's interesting. I'll pull up something here.
Sure.
Just for a second. Let's see. Okay, where is it?
He really only talked about the planet companion, which seems to be a planetary companion of that star. That's what's interesting about it.
All right, let's see here.
Now, I'm while you're pulling that up, I'm completely open with the idea that it could be an invader solar system. That somehow got close enough that it got grabbed, or I'm under the understanding that it was originally designed as a binary, but then that event occurred, and then that's what led to that being in the place that it's in, also in the type of orbit that's in. But I think we just have a lot more questions that need answers.
Okay, yeah. Are you guys seeing this screen?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay, so this is just the zodiacal wheel, and I've marked a couple of points on here, the 0 year and then 25,920. So this is the present, give or take a few decades, and then one cycle ago, and then half that cycle would have been 12,960. And I'm using the classical traditional numbers here, which are certainly close enough to the actual tangible numbers of modern scientific data. But you can see here, if we start from here and we go back through, you'll see here, here's the sign, not the constellation, but the sign of Pisces, Aries, Taurus, Gemini, Cancer, and then we're back in Leo. And if we follow this axis right through from our present back 13,000 years ago in round numbers, we're now right at the Virgo-Leo cusp. And what I've done is I've gone through all of the literature, finding evidence for dramatic climate change or events, Heinrich events, as you see Heinrich event 2 and Heinrich event 10. So they both roughly coincided with this period, this span of time of 25,920 years ago. If we go back 2,160, we'll see that the Piscean age was interrupted by several events, but the onset of the Dark Ages, which was pretty abrupt, the onset of the Little Ice Age, which was also pretty abrupt. We go back here at 4320, we're right within a century of the Bronze Age collapse, and that was associated with a Heinrich event. And a Heinrich event is when you have massive discharges of armadas of icebergs, primarily into the North Atlantic, because it's coming from the Laurentide ice sheet that's covering most of Canada and half of North America. So when those ice sheets grind their way across the land, they incorporate a lot of the material as dust and granulated material, pulverized material that gets broken up material that gets taken up into the mass of the ice sheet itself. So when that ice moves and reaches the coastline, it begins to calve off the margin of the ice sheet, falls into the ocean as an iceberg. It then begins to float to the south. And as it floats, it melts. And when it melts, now normally you've got the very almost like fine-grained marls that are forming from the little tiny microscopic creatures in the ocean that are dying and regularly and causing thick layers of massive, almost unstratified sediment. And you'll have those that look to be anywhere from, 6 to 12,000 years, and then they will be interrupted by a thick, gravelly layer of coarse material. And that's material that has been deposited by icebergs. So you've got these armadas of icebergs sweeping out into the North Atlantic. They're melting. As they melt, this debris that's included into the ice mass then falls to the ocean bottom and makes a very distinct layer. And these can be dated. And that's a Heinrich event. And so when you begin to consider what a Heinrich event is, the implications are that something really extraordinary is happening to the planet at that time to cause these, because we're talking about thousands of huge icebergs being disgorged simultaneously into the ice sheet, into the oceans. And then, during the end of the last ice age, I don't know what part of the country you guys are in, but yeah, there were armadas of icebergs being swept along in currents like that have now plowing, huge icebergs plowing the ocean bottom because they're so big, leaving great gouges in the bottom of the ocean. And they're as far south right now, they've been documented all the way down to Florida and South Carolina. So this is extraordinary masses of ice being disgorged into the ocean. So that's one of the things, so there's a collection of things here. The Alpine Iceman, his deposition in the getting killed and frozen into the ice in the Alps coincided with what I'm calling here a tripartite climate spasm that is now well dated to have occurred right around that interval that he died. 6480 coincides within a century or two of the onset of what's called the neoglaciation after the hypsothermal warming that characterized the age of Gemini and Cancer. However, there was a Heinrich event, number 6, that coincided with this number right here. And 8,300 years ago, what's called the before present 8,300 before present cold event. And we can go back. See, here's the end of the Younger Dryas, right smack in the middle of Leo. And then when we get on this axis, which is the Aquarian Leo axis, we've got Heinrich event 4. So this number 12,960 times 3, and we've got the Heinrich event 4, 12,960. So 12,960 times 5 gives us what? 12,960 times 5. Yeah, 64,800 years ago. So there you've got the Heinrich event 7A, and then times 7, which would be plus another 25,920. So that's dated right at about 90,000 years ago.
Wow.
So you can see how they're clustered along this line. This seems to be really aligned with
the concentrations.
Concentration, yeah, thank you. but you can see they're distributed around, and there's a high correlation between these specific numbers that have come down to us traditionally. Like most of these numbers have come to us ultimately through the Vedas, but they're also important to the Greeks, and they were also found. Sumerian numbers, the king lists were based upon these numbers, and we find them also in the Mayan cosmological systems, these recurrence of many of these numbers. So this seems to be a traditional model. Now, what is driving this kind of thing that you see right here? And notice again, this clustering at basically in round numbers, 13,000 years. So that does correlate with years. Now, I haven't detected a 20,000 year signal, but I'm not going to discount it and say it's not a possibility.
I think 13 is more likely based on the data. I would agree with you.
Yeah. 19,400. I don't have anything at that date.
No, I only said 20 because Tom Harrington believed that he didn't actually know what the entire rotation of that planet was around for its aphelion and perihelion. So he was just giving an estimate of he said between 10 and 20. That's what he said. So okay. I'm keeping open-minded to not being, I believe it's 13, but I was just sort of keeping open mind to
got it.
What he was saying.
Well, notice that right here in the middle of the age of Scorpio that was the late glacial maximum. That was when the last cycle of glaciation was at its most extreme. But you're bracketed like 19,440. That's pretty close to 20,000 years, but I don't have any data points for anything that happened right there. Heinrich have got 5 at 21,6.
No, I think it's most likely a 13,000. I think we can both agree that the data points towards a 13,000 year cycle of these events.
Yeah. And I think that you'll also notice there seems to be some clustering here around the age of Taurus, which is interesting. And then we've got this axis across here. We've got the late glacial maximum, and then 13. Notice, so if you come around 13,000 years, now you're at the tripartite climate spasm, right? And also notice termination of Heinrich event 2, come 13,000 years to the other side, and you've got this a potential air burst.
So you think it's possible that we're talking about two distinct time period events within a 26,000 year cycle that seem to occur during different time periods on a regular basis? Looks like somewhere.
That's what it's looking like.
Like let's call it a between a 4,500 and a 6,500 year cycle, and then like a 13,000 year cycle. Yeah.
So if you have to 13,000, or in this case, the 12,960, you get the 6,480. And right around, again, and these aren't super precise, but they're within a couple of centuries, which over geological timescales is very precise.
Yeah.
But yeah, you had the onset of neoglaciation, which, see, this period of time here, not counting the 8,300 before present cold event, this was a very warm time. Post that millennia, 2 millennia, 3 millennium after the deglaciation was extremely warm. And then right here at about the onset, as the vernal equinox moved against the star field of Taurus, you had a rapid cooling of the Earth that led to the expansion of glaciers and several other things. And then 2,100 years later, you had the Bronze Age collapse and associated with a Heinrich event. So, yeah, it's wow. Possibly some interesting correlations. But as to what's driving this, see, I kind of look at this, if you say, well, it might be associated with the precessional cycle, because these are precessional numbers, and 26,960 or 25,920 is, within a few decades of what's usually given as the time period for the precessional cycle. But I'm not saying the precessional cycle is driving this. I just look at this as a type of a clock. Something else is driving this. And we may have two components here. One, which is the periodic component, but then juxtaposed on that might be more random events, which, will kind of muddy the waters a little bit, but, just make it a little bit harder to perceive the cycles, but you just have to look a little harder, and I think they're there.
Yeah, like that's an awesome model. That data is incredibly compelling, and I think it just shows us that the alignment of where the concentrations are of these events is very difficult to argue with, especially when you're looking at that 960 year time period, which seems like, I think we both agree that yeah, there certainly are other times when these seem to be some correlation with events, but overwhelmingly the most significant of those events seem to be occurring on that 12,900 year time period.
It seems like that. But, this is a little getting old now. I mean, there's probably new data points that could be added. And if I had full-time research, spend my time full-time doing research, I may be able to add more data points. And I suspect that there are more data points, because this has got to be 7 or 8 years old since I did this. And we probably got some more precise dating of the actual events that are listed here.
Can I ask you, I'm just very curious, you and Graham and many others really talk extensively about that Younger Dryas being an impact event, or multiple impact events, we should call it. Do you have any idea your theory on where those impacts are? I know Graham has come out and discussed the Greenland impact area, but I'm concerned about that, considering the ice cap thickness over that area, and the fact that it seems like that event occurred much earlier, not during Younger Dryas. So I'm very curious to hear your thoughts on if you've seen evidence on where the Younger Dryas impact actually was, or in multiple places, like you could call it.
The answer is yes. And yes, with your qualification you just said, because at this point I think there's evidence of multiple impacts. And well, let's see. I could probably just show you. I haven't shown this to a lot of people yet. Let's see if I've got it handy here. It'll take me a second to pull it up. I can go ahead and pull it up and show this to you if
sure. Yeah, we always love to see
love the data,
lesser
Randall.
seen
Absolutely.
stuff for sure.
Okay, so let me just go back to my folder with my PowerPoint shows.
While he's looking for that, I just want to quickly add that one of the most compelling things that I think Randall brings up for a good comparison to understand is that rather than the Ice Age, the Younger Dryas, the Laurentide ice sheet and the European and Siberian ice sheet melting in a slow rate, and then the fact that the megafauna in the northern hemisphere disappeared as attributed to overhunting. I think the way we should be looking at this, and maybe Randall agrees, is that we're talking about a massive extinction event of megafauna up in the northern hemisphere along the areas of the ice cap on a much quicker basis than we're taught in school. That maybe these events that have led to these distraction and calving off of the ice caps and these massive floods that seem to have occurred and then refroze and then reflooded again, especially like in the Missoula flood lake area, like you talk about in the Northwest United States, is that these events may come with very extreme intensity in certain moments, and having these events where it happens so quickly that certain, like you pointed out, megafauna just boom like that go extinct because of how extreme some of these events have been.
Yes, some of them have been a very, very extreme. And I'll show you one thing. I think I found it here. Let's see here. I was there. Okay. So in terms of the Younger Dryas, we know that the proxies are things that, since something that indicates that this thing happened, but it's like fingerprints. Graham Hancock used the term fingerprints of the gods for his book, but it's like fingerprints. We're looking at stuff that you don't really readily see, just like fingerprints you don't readily see. Fingerprints left on the scene of a crime, but you have to use some kind of technological enhancement to see fingerprints, right? Well, the same with the proxies of say an impact event. And what I'm going to do here is I'll pull up something and we'll take a quick look at example of impact proxies. Let me go back to us here. There we go. Scares. Here we are. All right. Let me know if you're seeing this.
Yep.
Yes.
All right. So here, each of these are sites that have preserved impact proxies. And as it says here, YDB, Younger Dryas boundary spherules from 18 different sites. So these are scanning electron microscope images, illustrate the wide variety of sizes, shapes, and microstructures of the Younger Dryas boundary spherules. Diameters are in yellow. So, you've got 42 micrometers here, or microns, 25 here. This is a little bigger because this is a conglomerate, it looks like. Look at this peanut shell one. Now, see, this is where these microspherules have been melted and then fused together.
Through extreme heat, right?
Extreme heat, yes. Here, the extreme heat caused this to burst out, in gases that would have been inside this molten, tiny microscopic molten blob would have just burst out. And you can leave this, and you can see here how it's very, very clear that it was an outburst. You see how the rim is
exploded, basically.
Yeah, and then look at these, this pitcher, almost like a pitcher of water shape. Look at this here. It has damage here. This would have been almost like a microfracture. This would have been like a mechanical fracturing of it. And then you see these striations on it. Those are from the rapid quenching from the molten state, rapidly hardening. As it says, most spherules are rounded, but there are also dumbbells, bottle shapes, gourd shapes, which is J. This is the gourd shape, and ovoids, which is P. Here's an ovoid. Most small spherules are solid, although a few are hollow, whereas most large spherules are vesicular and or hollow. A large number of spherules were cross-section. Let's see here. Lacatellarite, which is a very difficult one to say. I did practice it at one point and I had it down, but I've now that's not important. Anyways, flow marks are called schleren, right? The flow marks, you can see the flow marks are in what creates the surface texturing of these things. Here you can see flow marks really clearly. These flow marks would require heats of 2,200 degrees centigrade.
Wow.
Yeah,
so vitrification heat enough to melt quartz and rock.
Yes. They were observed in 3 sites from sites A, E, and M. So A, E, and M right here. Many large spherules display accretion with other spherules, E, M, and Q. So yeah, E, M, and Q. So here, look there's fusion going on here where a larger spherule had smaller spherules impact into it, and they were still molten enough that once they impacted into it, they fused together. Mm-hmm. Interior and exterior compositions of both spherules are similar, but occasionally iron-rich material, which is represented by thin, light-colored bands, migrated or accreted to the outside of the spherule while molten. Some of the spherules have high percentages of titanium oxide, inconsistent with anthropogenic, but consistent with impact melting of titanomagnetite or ilmenite. So those are just examples. Then we look here at the stratigraphic distribution of the microspherules, and you can see that in all of these cases, look at where the date here is 12.9, here 13.
Wow.
12.1 plus or minus 0.7, 12.9, 13, 12.8, 13, 12.8. So yeah, and look at these are widely geographically distributed sites. 12.8, 12.8, 12.9, 12.8, 12.9, 13.3, 12.9, 13.0. Now 13.3 is probably an outlier. There's something probably that's biased the dating to be a little older. But yeah, so this is very interesting here. Your abundances of spherules by site plotted on a lower x-axis in numbers per kilogram. That's what's down here relative to the Younger Dryas boundary depth at 0 centimeters. Scoria-like object concentrations are the black lines. Scoria-like are going to be features that are produced in tremendous heat. So anyways, yeah, this is a very interesting table here.
Yeah, it is.
Evidence
now,
for deposition.
Can you speak about where those locations are around the earth? I know they have names like Big Eddy and Blackville. Do you have any idea where those are?
Well, this is in Syria. Arlington Canyon is on an island off the coast of California. Let's see, Lamel, that's in Belgium. Big Eddy, I should know where that is. Blackwater, that's in southern New Mexico. Cutzio, that's in Mexico. Gainey is, I think that's South Carolina. I know Topper is South Carolina. Sheridan Cave, I believe, is Texas. Murray Springs, Melrose is Pennsylvania. Lingen, let's see, Kimmel Bay. It's easy enough to find out these, but they're quite a widespread distribution. Of course, this is way back in 2013. So there have been additional sites added to this collection. This is just the sites at which these microspherals had been found as of 2013.
Is there a bias on the reason why most of them are the United States, or does that actually point?
Yes, there is, because this is where most of the investigation has occurred.
Okay.
Most of the scientists that have been looking for this, and most of the sites that had samples that could be dated and examined, were from the United States. But for example, in Abu Huraira, they based upon the studies in the United States, they went back and found, some scientists went back, found the Younger Dryas boundary and took a look, and sure enough, they found the microspherals.
So worldwide, basically, is what we're talking about.
At this point, we're covering about half the world. But since then, I know that evidence has been found in even as far down as Antarctica. So when the papers came out showing that there was proxies in Antarctica, I pretty much concluded at that point that, yeah, it's global, it's worldwide. Now, that doesn't mean that the effects are uniformly distributed over the whole world. Yeah. But yeah, it still would have been a global event. So
now we're kind of winding down to our last few minutes that we have. I want to get each of your thoughts on this. Matt mentioned, magnetic pole shift, and we know that recently we've seen that our magnetic north is rapidly moving towards Siberia, and we've had an increase in natural occurrences like earthquakes and volcanoes, and our weather patterns have been changing over the past few years. And I'm wondering if either of you think that we could possibly be due for another world-altering cataclysm within our lifetime.
Do you want me to go first, or do you want?
Sure,
Matt,
Randall, go ahead.
Okay.
Why don't you go ahead, Matt?
All right. So I want to just add, Randall's data there is incredible. It shows you that clearly we've had the ability for heat to impact the Earth in such an extreme way that we see the fusion of rock in a way where temperatures exceeded 2,000 degrees. Now, that's important because it really doesn't necessarily matter on the surface whether or not it's just cosmic impacts or if it's from a massive coronal mass ejection that allows that kind of incredible heat to reach the surface of the planet in different places. That's important, but really let's take that off the table for a moment. And let's simply consider the fact that let's go to a place like Luxor, Egypt, with the Colossi of Memnon. We find these two massive stone statues, right, that stand in place. They're still there today. But the interesting aspect of the Colossi of Memnon is that they both have vitrification or melting on the northeast sides. Okay, and that's really interesting because it shows us that heat in that event came from the northeast side. Okay, and we also look in places like Egypt, Abu Sir, and other areas. We find in Peru as well. We find other vitrification of some of these megalithic sites that shows that they melted or were scarred by such extreme heat. We're talking about something on the surface that if humans were there, they would have likely been vaporized. And it's interesting how You see massive underground city areas like Kuyu that have been built to house over 20,000 people with air shafts and these massive stone doorways that could be rolled across to completely block off and allow these civilizations to exist down there. And it really brings up the question of these events were so extreme that they literally would make the surface of the planet in a lot of different places completely unlivable and inhospitable, to the point where if you were there, you would have just instantly disappeared and died just because of how extreme those events were, which is why we see so many interesting stories. I mean, Randall's going to be going down in the Southwest United States. And of course, the Hopi have great traditions and stories in their legends about how they were led into underground caves by the ant people, which I think were just a group of higher beings or just ascended teachers that led them down into caves to survive these events, which really echoes the same thought process as Kuyu. So let's go forward now to our time period we're in now, as Chris brought up. Having said that, we're almost exactly 13,000 years ago since the Younger Dryas event. Now, as Chris has pointed out, magnetic north has been moving rapidly towards Siberia. We've seen an increase in volcanism around the world to a degree where it's impressive enough that during our history, we have to look at it and wonder a little bit about it, whether or not all these events are related. We've seen potential salinity changes in the Atlantic Ocean that some are worried that could disrupt the Gulf Stream with the balance of fresh and salt water, pointing towards the fact that these events seem to also have a major role with the currents of the world in relation to ice sheet formation, and then the rapid ending of those time periods to a warmer Earth time period. So when we look at all of that, we look at the movement of magnetic north, we look at increase in volcanism and earthquakes and climatic changes around the planet. And of course, those are blamed on human activity, which Randall and I both sort of laugh at, looking at ice cores and looking at how we've had rises and dips in the past history before known industrialization of humans that pales in comparison to now. I do firmly believe that we're in the middle or coming towards one of these events again. Now, I want to just add to those who may be very fearful of that statement that I am actually very optimistic. When I've been looking at certain aspects of how some components of geoengineering of reflecting solar particles back into space, as well as potentially some things like Nikola Tesla technology that may be being utilized in places like Antarctica with protecting and affecting the electromagnetic, geomagnetic aspect of the balance of the poles on the Earth. I do believe that this is well known within certain sects of higher government and is being secretly prevented. And I do believe if you look at how the ancient traditions about looking forward into time period of human history and how this current time period is discussed by some ancient cultures like the Maya as being a civilization that reaches the next stage that maybe potentially other civilizations have not. And I attribute that to the idea that we may have certain technologies present to us that no other civilization of these master or lost civilizations had access to. And we may be the first civilization to prevent our own demise and reset that has ever occurred here. And that maybe come into the idea of why Aquarius in this time period of the next 50 to 70 years may play such a significant role in our story. And so I just want to point out that I do think that there are certain technologies and things that are happening right now that may be quietly being used to prevent an event that seems to happen on the 13,000 year cycle.
And it would be very interesting to think that those in higher positions of power already know something is going on, and it could be attributed to some of the agendas we see going on right now. Very interesting. I don't know. What are your thoughts, Randall?
Well, I have mixed feelings. My thought is, I started studying into this kind of stuff literally in high school. So, some of the people that I used to think knew more than I did about some of these things are no longer here. And maybe I'm not quite as impressed now as I was when I was younger with their accomplishments. Although, there's many people that I still hold in very high regard and high esteem. But I have searched high and low through the archives for hints and indications that there is someone who has got this figured out. And I'm not willing to say rule it out. No, I don't think that it's possible. In fact, I like to believe that there's still, somebody out there that really knows what's going on. And sooner or later, hey, I might get to meet him and go, hey, could you explain a few things to me? But, as the years go on and I get older, when you're a young man, you can look forward and okay, there's older guys out there, well, like me, who's been studying this shit for a long time, and I know a few things, probably more than the average bear, but at the same time, there's a lot of gaps and holes in my knowledge that I'm hoping that I can put some more pieces together while I still have some time left. But I guess my point is the older I've gotten and the more I learn, the less I'm inclined to believe that there is somebody out there who's got it figured out, only because when I look at the political leadership we've got now, I'm like, well, I don't think it's Joe Biden. I don't think he's got more figured out about this. And I don't think it's Kamala Harris either or Nancy Pelosi. Now, these are the three top tiers of American government today.
Three puppets. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but then I go, okay, well, who are the puppet masters and what do they know? My thought is they may know a whole lot more about economics than I do, and political science perhaps, but I don't know if they necessarily know more about history than I do, or about some of these, if we want to call them fringe topics, because within the mainstream framework of thinking, the kind of things that we look into are considered fringe topics. Now, interestingly, things that were considered very fringe a couple of decades ago aren't so fringe anymore. When the Younger Dryas boundary got proposed in 2007, there was a whole cadre of scientists that closed ranks to basically completely discredit the idea. And of course, when you look at it, you can see that there were political motivations there. And we probably don't have time to get into all of that right now, and why political motivation would be find the idea of some kind of a cosmic event or a cosmic impact, however you want to characterize it, being the cause. Because right now, like we've all just kind of referenced in this conversation, I think we're all agreeing that, we're being presented now with a manufactured climate crisis that wants to blame we're in the middle of some unprecedented climatic event now that's our fault. And because it's our fault and it's the result of our activities have to be controlled. That's in a nutshell what this is all about.
Exactly.
And, I'm not convinced that those people really know what's going on. I'm open if you can present to me evidence that there is somebody, like, maybe an underground group, somebody that, and in my mind at this point, yeah, it's probably got to be some, underground base or somebody on the moon that's, because I go, okay, I'm 71 years old now. And, if I could go for another 50 or 100 years and keep my intellectual faculties intact, what could I know? What could Einstein have known? What could any of these, a smart thinking people, intellectual people, how much could those of us who are thinkers, I'm not especially smart, but I'm smarter than the average. Okay, I admit that. It's not my arrogance or ego. It's just a simple fact. But okay, if smart, educated people could live for another, let's say, double our present day lifespan and keep our functions intact, what could we know? I mean, what a waste. I'm thinking, geez, I'm just getting to the point where I'm starting to figure things out, and I'm supposed to be going, wait a minute now, I've only got a couple of decades left at the best. Oh. but on the other hand, listen, here's we circle back to this idea of the Grail and the idea of restoration, because that is, I think, a very real part of this ancient knowledge, Matt, that you were referring to. And that, you said I forget the words you used, but what was invoking in my mind was this idea that I've drawn from biblical studies, which is the curse that came upon the human species, whose manifestation was the expulsion from paradise, from the garden. And we see that curse replayed again in the murder of Abel by Cain. We see it again in the Great Flood. It's the curse that comes upon the earth, and it's a curse, I think, that ultimately we have the power to break that curse.
Yeah.
And I think that you mentioned several things. You mentioned Tesla. He was onto some things. Victor Schauberger was onto some things. Wilhelm Reich was onto some things. Other researchers have been onto things that I think each one of these is like a strand of the thread that if we weave it together, we're going to see this tapestry of our own past. And again, the Grail, I think, is now a symbol for that lost technology. And circling back to that, and then I'll mention, that's going to be the theme that unites these 2 weekends, from Easter weekend to Earth Day weekend, and the excursions that we're going to take into Hopi land and some very interesting places in the interim. Pictographic places, rock art that's normally not accessible to the public, but we're in a privileged position because, a lot of these tribes are concerned that their young people, their young millennials aren't going to necessarily effectively carry on their traditional stories. And so they're more open now than they were a generation ago to sharing their stories with outsiders. So I'm privileged to be in a position where we're going to have attending this 2 weekends of events in Sedona, both a Hopi storyteller and a Zuni storyteller. And
I'm glad you're doing that.
Yeah. And I will just share, let's see here. What have I got here? I'll share, how much time we got left, Chris?
Yeah, go for it. I want to say while you're pulling that up, it was definitely an honor to have these 2 generations of amazing researchers here tonight to share their knowledge and insights into our incredible history that's been hidden. And this is what we need. We need more discussions like this going forward. And this is the only way we're going to find out the truth about our hidden history. And I want to thank both of you gentlemen for taking the time to do this again tonight. This was fantastic.
Well, thanks for hosting it, Chris. I've enjoyed it. I think this is our 3rd time together. Is that right?
Yeah, 34th, one of those, yeah.
Yeah, well, I've enjoyed it, and I'm sure you've got a great audience, and I'd like to invite people, check out, you can go to randallcarlson.com, or you can go, if you'll see here, worldviews with a Z media.com. That's Robert Dakota, who's organizing the event. But there's a whole bunch of stuff going on with some really cool people. And if you go here, you can find out more about it. Obviously, this is me, and that's Graham Hancock, and this is George Howard. As I said, he's one of the leading researchers on Younger Dryas catastrophism in the world today. And we're going to be there sharing ideas, and we've got some really incredible guests. Spencer Taylor, a young man who's just finished 7 years post-production right now of his documentary called The End of Recess, which is about basically the collapse and demise of modern education and alternatives. So that's going to be a big part of the theme of the 2 weekends. We've got Dave Matheson, who's coming in, who's showing how all of the ancient planet star lore is all synthesized into a grand integral scheme of things. It's truly amazing stuff. So we will be getting out under the night sky with him while he tells us and brings in the star lore from ancient cultures from all over the world and shows these remarkable parallels between how ancient people interpreted the sky.
Wow.
Yeah. So who else? A number of other people. It's going to be very interesting. And there's the whole thing may be, I don't know, to me, it's not expensive but it's Sedona, Arizona. We're going to be at couple of really cool places where we're going to be staying. Poco Diablo in Sedona, but there's multiple packages, and there's also going to be a live stream. We're going to live stream the thing. So if you can't actually get there in person, there's going to be a live stream. And if you sign up for one weekend, you get the live stream for both weekends forever. So that's kind of a cool deal. But yeah, there's different options available. So just check it out. And, if you can't get there, then do the live stream. And it's going to be jam-packed. It's going to be a really concentrated dose of information. And we're hoping that out of this, we're really trying to galvanize a global movement here. And that's kind of ultimately what this is all about.
That's great,
And what a great place for a launch pad, Sedona, Arizona.
I appreciate you fostering that collaboration of great minds to come together to create this synergy of changing the consciousness on the planet to start looking at all of this in a different light. So thank you, Randall.
Hey, You're welcome. Listen, I can't think of anything to me more interesting and fun to do than that. So
me either. I agree. Exactly.
Well, this has been fantastic. I want to, like I said, thank you, gentlemen, both again for coming on, taking the time to do this. This is what we need more of. We need more meetings of these wonderful minds to get more of our information about our hidden past, like I said. And I hope that maybe we can do this sometime again in the near future, because this was awesome, and I think we barely scratched the surface of some of this stuff. There's so much more we could cover.
Yeah, Chris, Go ahead, Randall.
Well, I'll say quickly that, I want people to just randallcarlson.com will get you to my website, because we are actively looking for the prime perfect piece of real estate to launch the first prototype. And this is where we're, in fact, even it's gotten, the interest has grown to the point now where we're probably going to do two. I've been a builder for 4 decades, and I built millions of dollars of buildings, and scattered for a whole bunch of owners scattered all over. And now I want to bring it all together and put all of the things that I've learned about sacred geometry and sacred architecture and the ancient template, bring all of that together, fused with modern technology, and begin to build. Because I believe that there are times in history, just like you were talking about, Matt, these periodic times where there's catastrophes. I think there's periodic times where there's concentrated regeneration of things. We can go back to the 1200s, and we see like suddenly the whole of Europe comes together to build these great monuments to the glory of man and God, right? These great cathedrals.
These leaps, right? These great
leaps, yes. I think we're standing on the threshold right now of a leap. And part of what this seminar and this conference is about is what is going to be our cathedrals for our age, for our generation.
Yeah.
What do we do to carry on this great work that goes back to the dawn of history and beyond?
Standing on the backs of giants, truly.
When we pick up our trowel, that's what it's about. It's time once again to pick up the trowel and go to work.
I love that. That's really beautiful, Randall. And can I just say thank you so much, Chris, for hosting this. It's been truly an honor to work with you, Randall. I really appreciate everything you're doing, and I appreciate the knowledge that you've obtained over so many countless years of studying. So thank you so much for all you're doing to contribute to our story and the human race, because people like you are integral into this age of moving into these leaps of higher consciousness, when, hey, if we can survive and get through one of these resets, who knows where the human story can go? What is the potential of our story and the potential of us?
What is the potential? And I say that the potential is beyond anything we're almost even capable of imagining at this point.
And we truly will become gods, just like we've always studied all along from the very past. So I just want to say thank you so much, Chris. And for anyone interested in my work, you can find mine at thestageoftime.com or my YouTube channel, Matthew Lacroix. And I truly hope that, Randall, you and I can have another conversation in the future.
Yeah, well, hey, man, we should hang out in the field. I'd love to take you out and begin to reveal the hidden messages of the landscape to you.
That would be awesome. I'm in Colorado, so I'm not that far, and perhaps we can meet up sometime. That would be truly an honor to work with you again.
Oh, it'd be great. Yeah. Well, there's places right in Colorado we could go visit.
Absolutely.
And I could show you things. And okay.
Let's do it. Absolutely. Anytime, Randall. I'm available anytime for you, my friend.
All right.
For sure. And I might try and make it out to your event there in Sedona. I'm in Colorado as well. And I'd love to give you some publicity for it as well. So that'd be great.
Yeah, I mean, this is really, I also mentioned that this is a fundraiser. I mean, the money we make off this is going into the pool that's going to be, we've got a heavy rainstorm just came in here. Perfect as you guys were talking, as Chris was talking, I heard the thunder.
Yeah.
That was very impressive, Chris. So, but my point is this is going to be a fundraiser, and the people who are interested will be having a newsletter. I have a newsletter that goes out every month that's kind of to keep people up, but we're going to have a special focused newsletter to anybody who's interested in this specific project. So as we're going out to scout land, for example, for looking for sites for this place. We'll do a newsletter talking about this to keep people up to speed on what we're doing. If we go ahead and we purchase a piece of land, and we're going to explain the whole process right from the beginning, doing the geomantic survey to putting the pole in the ground, the omphalos, laying out the cosmic angles, creating the juxtaposing of the cosmic template on the land, and then how we create, using sacred geometry, the infrastructure to emerge from the earth almost as an organic living thing. And then that will be the place where people can now come together and share their minds and thoughts and so on.
Bring the great mystery schools back once again, right?
Yes. Yeah. You nailed it. That's it. Exactly. I
love that, man. That is fantastic. Well, like I said, gentlemen, we are going to have to do this again. We barely scratched the surface of some of this stuff, so I'd love to speak with both of you again soon. Matt, I know we'll be talking again in the future.
Absolutely.
Yes, definitely. This was great. Until next time, everyone, have an excellent evening. We will be talking again tomorrow as well.